Good afternoon. Hope you're good. Hope you can hear me. All the usual paranoia over whether the tech is working, and so as ever, points for whoever tells me first that you can hear me loud and clear. Of course, hoping that you can. I'm Jack Chew. This is Chewing It Over, 12:30 to 1 o'clock weekdays, and I'm often starting the show by saying I've been really looking forward to this, but I often am, and that's why we pick these shows. That's why we pick these guests. That's why we pick these topics. It's because I bloody love it, don't I? Love talking to you guys and involving you in these important topics that define our time, especially this one in FCP and MSK. It comes back up because it's important and it's really defining. It spans my three core interests really, which is clinical excellence, policy making, and aspiring for reformed policies that will achieve better healthcare in this country, and then the third one being, of course, education and forward planning, right? The bridging of the gap between what we know and how we transmit that into future generations in practice, again, for the betterment of clinical healthcare. I'm feeling a bit naked when I don't have my little frame on. Where's my little frame? Here we go. That's better. There you go. I feel a bit better now. I feel a bit less naked. Thank you to Samantha Shelton for saying all good and giving me the emoji. Very important, Samantha, thank you, and really appreciate it. Hope you hang around for this chat, which is, of course, going to be something that we want to be as interactive as possible because of the topic. I'm going to shut up in a minute and introduce our guest, Keith Graham, who's joining me today. Really looking forward to getting stuck into this with him. Before I do, I just wanted to clarify one thing. I think one of the cop-outs of my job is if I then say, well, we just platform everything and we ask all the questions and be devil's advocate and stuff. As you guys know, I do declare my interests and my opinions on this show, and this will be no different. However, one of the things that I think is important for me to say is that on this topic, I am often platforming the conversations of which we sort of challenge the status quo. That is my shtick. But also, I am not averse to someone coming on and absolutely fanboy or fangirling all processes related to FCP, right? I am describing my concerns, especially because I'm on record from 7 years ago making some of these noises. And so it's not one big I told you so, but it's definitely me sort of reflecting back some of the outcome that's occurring where we are learning lessons that we should have seen coming, and we need to get it together because it's important enough. If you guys feel that this is all one big sort of naysaying approach and that I'm missing something from my analysis that you want to bring to it, honestly, you're front of the queue for Chewing It Over shows. I promise you, there's absolutely no way that I'm choosing to not platform that. I want to hear from you. Make sure that things are thorough and bring your opinions to this show, be that in the comments or you can be a guest on it. So I wanted to make sure that was said because I think when I analyse how we visited this topic, I think it could be said that we've done that, and I don't want to be that guy. So help me out, and if you feel that you are missing something or you feel that you've got something to offer, then bring that to the party. You will be given this platform, and for a change, I will shut up occasionally as well, and you can talk a bit. So, Keith, can you hear me?
Yes, I can
He's
hear
done
you.
that on purpose. There he is. Yeah, good one. I like the miming. Right, so I want to throw it to you straight out the gates then, mate. You've been pretty open on social media, telling a glimpse of the story that you've had, having been in FCP for a period of time. But before we get into that, can you just tell us a little bit of a background and a context prior to that as to what your career has been to date and how you ended up into the role in the first place?
Okay, well, I'll abridge I checked this out actually. I'll abridge the 48 jobs that I've had so far.
Okay.
Into mainly MSK, sort of the fairly classic kind of hospital-based journey, and then I sort of fell into A&E, which is, I guess, that's the first contact, which isn't primary practice. So I did a lot of A&E, minor injuries, urgent care. I did an acute illness certificate, so I was allowed to sort of assess ill people in minor injuries unit, which didn't have doctors. Did my injecting a long time ago. I did a lot of sport. I worked in pro rugby and pro football. And I kept sort of, and I did a bit of teaching at the University of Bath on the MSc program. So a whole varied all around MSc, sport and exercise medicine, emergency care. Those are my sort of three things. I haven't really decided which one I want to do yet. Just keep doing them. I left Bristol Rovers. I was head of medical there. And I was going to go back to the MAT service, the interface service. It was a job I'd had before. I spoke to the manager. I was kind of quite interested in going back to it. She asked me nicely if I fancied working in the prison. I thought, working with badly behaved people generally. Sort of football is quite a good setup for that, to go from footballers to prisoners. That was interesting. And then there was a change of contract So I didn't end up going back to maths. And I was sort of looking, I thought the prison was interesting. I learned quite a lot of interesting things there, but I thought I really want to get back into sort of the MSK side of things. And then I saw the FCP job and I knew about it. You know, you could hardly, I'm not sure you could work in MSK medicine without being aware that the elephant was in the room, that this thing was there. And it was literally 3 miles down the road. A practice that I know has got a reputation. I thought that looked great. I'm going to have a look at that. So I went into it probably without having ever read a lot of the FCP stuff, had a bit of a quick look online. You know, I knew things were coming, like this kind of the training thing. I thought, yeah, you're great. Spoke to those. I mean, I was prescribing, I was injecting, I was doing all the things they wanted an FCP to do. I'd worked for the MAT service, so I kind of knew the ins and outs of that. 20 odd years of MSK, so I had that background, which they had no MSK experience in the practice. And it seemed like an absolute shoe-in. And about 3 months later, the roadmap was launched, and I read it, and I just sort of went, like, blah, deflated. I think I've been honest with the partners. I said, if that had been fully described before I applied and seen the job, I wouldn't have applied for the job. It's not because I've loved the job, brilliant, but I saw the volume that was required, and I've got other plans for this next year. I've enrolled at UEL to do my MSK sonography. Really looking forward to it. And I just sort of deflated, and I took a long time to decide that it's just the size of the thing. There was a little bit early doors where they said people already in the post, there'd be, well, the way I read it was that there'd be some kind of APEL, some kind of accommodation made for the people already working in the post. And they're all, oh, brilliant, because I'm already in. And the accommodation was you just had to do the whole thing. Great. Because normally you do stage 1 before you start. And the combination was you could do stage 1 while you were doing it. It's like, that doesn't feel like an accommodation. 18 months of FCP experience, it doesn't, there seemed to be no credit for that. And that was.
So I want to just pull the brakes a second, because I think it's well.
I will just talk for half an hour if you let me.
Oh no, but, well, it's better that way than me wittering on. The audience are used to that. But I want to just sort of admit that I've been, it's no surprise, I've been a big cheerleader for the roadmap, and its main necessity philosophically really for actually offering some sort of codified credibility to advanced practice as is being competed with in a sense, or complementing the offering in primary care, and it's where a lot of my passion lies. And so the aspiration to some sort of respectable and measurable excellence clinically is something that really mattered to me. Now, that doesn't then say I can divorce myself from what that looks like in practice, right? I'm someone who really does hope to be pragmatic rather than utopian. But in this instance, the detail is something that I don't have to face up to. So not for the same reasons, but I left my NHS advanced practice role around the time just prior to the roadmap coming in for different reasons, just because I was being pulled in too many different directions. But it's something that the application of it, the grandfathering process that could have occurred, that many are craving, and it sounds a bit like you. How would you? What I would have been concerned about if that would have been too generous, let's say, is that you've got part of the reason I'm so passionate about it existing is because I have what some argue is a pessimistic analysis of the current status quo with the personnel that are in situ. And if we ended up just having a bit of a signing off and nod if you're already in situ, those pretenders would never be held accountable. How would do you feel that it's been too heavy-handed, or do you understand though why it's ended up being so when I described that process?
Yeah, look, I think the roadmap is brilliant. I think I said in my post on Facebook and Twitter, it's brilliant if you have not a lot of experience and you want to build towards what they want. It's very comprehensive. It's a good, it's doable, it's achievable. I said the volume just doesn't suit me, but it might, other people are kind of quite into that. So I did the NMP and the volume of it was all right, but it's still big. I just think there are ways to cheat any system. Like even with roadmap as it is 92 competencies, there would be a way to kind of get that abridged. Any system can be defeated if you like, and it's integral to our integrity that we sort of don't cheat the system. Other people who are not us will always cheat the system. That's just the fact of life. I like to think there would have been some
difference though when individuals. It's more likely that an individual will cheat the system on self-certifying, a bit like we all do with our HCPC self-reg, right? Who reads it?
No,
but
Yeah, no, I know what you mean.
When you get 3 or 4 people having to collaborate to bullshit the system,
Yeah.
it's like it de-risks it a bit, doesn't it?
It is, yeah. I think there could have been, I mean, I think there could have been some way. I mean, I liked actually how they allow for any prior learning at level 7 to be included. So the NMP was able to be included across. That was brilliant. And if you've done an MSc in the last 5 years, I think it is, you're laughing because you'll be able to slide loads of those modules across. So they built in that APEL for somebody like me who did MSc like a long time ago, and it wasn't in advanced practice. It was in sport and exercise medicine, which didn't have any of those advanced practice principles in it really. I still think there is room for, whether it be like almost like for anybody in post, to have like an hour or a morning with, whether it be an independent assessor to go through everything. But right, really, realistically, the GP trainers, they don't fudge GP qualifications. They do it all properly, and I think you should be able to trust a GP trainer to walk through those things and go, I've observed this, I've observed this, I've observed this. Almost like they're saying they have seen you do these things and go, right, of the 92 competencies, we've seen 26, and you don't then have to find things that it's because finding proof for things you've already done and have seen to be done, and that's where it feels like you have to start with a blank piece of paper. And the people who, I mean, I was only post 18 months when I left. I know people who've been doing this job for like 2-3 years, and they've got to start with a blank piece of paper, and that seems unfair to them.
Yeah.
So I agree with what you're saying. I think there should have been some capacity, some way to have some of those competencies kind of like still checked by somebody, but somebody who knew you had those skills. There's plenty of skills on the competence practice that I had never done before. It's like, and when I was thinking of doing it, I was like, right, I need to do this bit, needs to be quite a bigger bit of work. This one should be easy, but there's like the amount of time it would have taken. I don't really have the time, and and in the grand scheme of things, that there are a lot of practices I know that are now saying to the physios who are saying they don't want to do it, they say, well, we'll employ you as a physio, use the funding for a paramedic or a pharmacist. We'll employ you as a consultant physio, which is another bugbear of mine, but a physio, and you can do the job and you don't need to do the roadmap. And it's like, gets around it because the CQC are only interested in potentially people employed as first contact physios. Are they going to check if physios working in a GP practice are seeing first contact patients? There's always ways
they know they don't, and there's certainly no legal reason as to why they have to, because we know that as is in these 4 walls, is that we see technically, we're registered professionals that can see people off the street quite literally anyway. So there's absolutely no reason. It's a bit of a leaky bucket in that regard. Yeah. One of the arguments that I'm always grappling with is that when I make a case against a mature grandfathering approach to sort of recognition and respect for those with time in service, right? Yeah. Is that one of the things that would totally puncture my analysis, if it is such a vast minority that it is not worth creating a governance infrastructure to try and weed out the few rotten apples. Like, why does that matter, Jack? It's because I admit that I see that as not just being a percentage, and that I see it as being, even if I think I'm generous to say north of 10%, right? And that's based on not me holding people to really weird standards on styles of practice or any edge case analysis on gospel according to Chew. I'm just meaning in terms of prioritizing reasoning, maturing away from being a narrow sort of structuralist or orthopedic in their thinking. I just mean that on encountering in my career, I feel like there are a lot of people that have been hiding in these side rooms, wearing a shirt to work, that are unaccountable. And it's because I don't end up thinking it's a fringe. That means that I feel like any process that can help the credibility of the profession and to raise standards so that we can trust, so that I could send a relative that lives elsewhere in the country to someone without knowing who they are, right? This notion of being able to say, go and see a physiotherapist for that, and they'll evaluate you thoroughly, blindly. That credibility for me comes with some level of accountability rather than just job interviews. And do you share that supposed pessimism, or what's your sort of take on my sort of sense there?
Yeah, and I think grandfathering is, as I think somebody's just commented, there are plenty of physios who get in as physios without just because they've been doing it, and that's the wrong reason. And I think David just said something about that, and it's like I 100% agree that just because you were doing the job for 5 years doesn't mean you can do this job. And in some ways, having a one-off hour or two, almost like defending your PhD, not that I have, but that process of going through those competencies, GPs and GP trainers are they're good people. I haven't met any with like integrity issues at all. It's like and they want to do a good job and they want quality. Part of the reason my partners employed somebody at FCP because they wanted the quality of the role. They didn't wait for the funding. They wanted to get into it. And I actually think that a lot of the GPs who have, let's say, dubious experienced physios, let's say, or people who are just in the room treating people and getting on it, they may not know they have somebody just doing that. And actually sitting down and working through the 92 whatever competencies might go, oh, you only got 6? Oh, right. Oh, crap. We actually need to do... And in some ways, that process would have actually highlighted where those people were, as opposed to saying, oh, you've got 18 months. Oh, yeah, you've ticked it off, which is really wrong. So I think you could make a balls up of doing a grandfathering kind of job. And I think when physio took on all the other professions as physios who call themselves physios, is the worst possible way to grandfather. Oh, you've been calling yourself a physio for 10 years. You can be a chartered physio. That is like, what? Like, what?
It's a great point. It's a great point that David's making, because I am, and although I know of that history, I wasn't involved in it.
I wasn't either. I'm old, but I'm not that old. Not that old.
Yeah, let's divorce ourselves from that a bit. But what? That's reassuring. I think that's interesting because there isn't much, if anything, between us on that. You're meaning that it doesn't have to be one or the other. It doesn't have to be a full blinkered grandfathering process just on a cross fingers, but it also, you're describing that the process as it stands has been too onerous and also is too disrespectful of the time served. It hasn't given opportunity in a way.
It gives nothing. It's the zero credit for time served. And I'm not saying you should get credit for time served, but like in that time served, my GP partners would be able to say he definitely see him do that every day. Seemed that they should be able to put their name it as, you know, it's one of those things like in an interview. Some things you have to do by CV, some things you have to do by interview, some things you have to do by certificate, some things you have to discuss. It's like there should be that, I think, and that's not a hard thing to bring in either. They could still do that and say, actually, for the people who've had at least 6 months experience or at least 12 months experience, they have to say, you know, it may be somebody who's just started a week ago could still do it, but they're not going to get any of the competencies. But it has to be something that the partners have observed, not just that the physio is saying, oh, I can do that and I can do that. It's like our partners would nail on certain of those competencies. They go, there is no need for him to spend an hour watching him do this and then writing it down and reflect on it, because we've seen it every day. And to me, there's not enough wiggle room in that. I mean, and maybe I misunderstood it. Maybe sort of Amanda would come on and say, oh, yeah, you can do that. I said, well, I don't perceive that's what you can do.
Well, but that's one of the things that unfortunately I witness most days happening, where someone says, this is a shame we can't do it. And then the fact that Amanda or others at the top of that tree can say, well, it can be. It's like the fact that it's not known by those that are really trying to understand it, myself included, is telling in itself, right? The communication piece that hasn't associated and been attached to this is concerning anyway. I don't think that's a good get out. I've witnessed it in not just FCP, but elsewhere in policy making, is that when someone offers someone, it's not just someone that's been ignoring something, ignoring all communications associated to it, and says, well, it should be like this. And then when someone comes back, sometimes that is a gotcha to say, it is like that, you just don't know about it. When someone's been really attentive to the entire journey and process and is invested for both self-interested and broader community interested reasons, they've been paying attention and they still misunderstand it. There's no gotcha there to say it is that way. If they've misunderstood it, they've not done it so willfully. And I think that is almost like, it fascinates me that still keeps happening. And especially, you know, I'll admit as well, just especially as someone that continues to offer various platforms in order to try and help with said communication. It's like that is just, I'm watching that slow car crash continue to occur, which is annoying. What I wanted to ask, and actually I'll ask the audience for a direct question then, is FCP serving the purpose that it's designed to efficiently, in your opinion? So those that are listening in live, please do let us know as to whether or not you feel it is serving its purpose as you think it could, or living up to its promise? Because I think what's interesting is, and we've seen this from hopefully this conversation a bit, but also both mine and Keith's previous tweetings on this and the like, is we're both into the role, the process. We're excited for what it could promise. I want to ask the audience, and I'll ask you this now, Keith: is it living up to its promise, in your opinion?
I'll say it's living up to my expectations of it. I said to you before we came on, like, I think it's a brilliant idea. I'm thinking if you could magic up the physio per practice who like at the point at which every PCN has one, and they have it's gonna be good. It's going to be a good thing. You know, I said in the chat the analogy of, I was told it's like building an airplane that's already flying. It's like, should it have got to that point? I don't know how it could have. I think it was always going to look a bit like this. It was always going to look like people who, you know, like I was fortunate. I had the NMP and the injecting and kind of the MSK background and the MSK interface background. So I was sort of slotted into the role. And there are people who want to get experience, and they're going to take a lot longer to get through. And so it was always going to be a bit of a mishmash. You know, my main bugbears were the roadmap didn't suit me in terms of the volume of it. I've done that stuff before, and it just seemed huge. I mean, had it been different, and like Neil's right, he's made a comment about the time spent is not necessarily the quality of experience. I totally agree with that. That's why I don't think it should be, if you've got 12 months, you don't have to do it. I don't think that at all. I think a good quality person who's really got their head around this in 1 day a week will be able to have like better experience than somebody doing 3 days a week who's really not that experienced. My bugbear was on, I mean, if we changed the roadmap and said, okay, we give you the APEL, you don't have to do the other bits, I still probably wouldn't stay in it, because my next year looks very different. And I think somebody recently commented about how this whole 6 months from starting to get to the end of it, well, I don't know if everybody here has ever tried to get on an M level course. It doesn't tend to work like that. Like if you start an FCP job tomorrow and you've got to be enrolled and September's full and March is full, you're into next September to start it. It's like, and then the funding of it, and it's sort of, it actually has now changed from you can do it anytime to within 6 months. Like that seems ludicrous to me to think you can do it. If you want to go down the M level route, unless you've already pre-registered and you're starting in September and your job, it's like that 6 months also seems like, where did that come from? And I appreciate there has to be a limit on it, but if you're going down a university course, they take months, and they take months to get on. It's like, to go on the sonography course I wanted to go on, it's taken me 14 months to get to the point where I can start it. And it's so I don't know. I forget what the original question was, Jack.
They're not self-serve quizzicals, are they? It's like, it's not as if you can do that on a whim in your own time one evening. So I think that's relevant. The time frames. I think it's also one of the things that's just really. It was always going to be hard to factor in timeframes, and then with the pandemic, which obviously I think all of us are bored of it being used as a catch-all excuse, but it'd be ignorant for us to not recognise the incredible challenges to get any appropriate airtime, funds, resources, and attention to things non-COVID related or not directly COVID related at this time. So I've got huge sympathies in that direction. My question to you and to the audience, of which some people are answering, was is it living up? Is it living up to its promise? If we're all in agreement that it's a promising idea, is it living up to it as it stands?
And I think it's not ready. It's not ready. It's an airplane that is being put together as it's flying, is the exact quote. And I think it's not living up to its promise. I think it can, and there's a chance that it will, that it could. It can and it could. I'm not going to say it will, because I'm not sure of the volume of people are going to be. Maybe eventually one day, like Rob alluded to, maybe there aren't enough people coming through who want to do it as well. It's a big job. It's not an easy job. It's a challenging job, and it will not suit everybody.
Yeah, Neil Language here saying not currently, and I'm pretty sure that comment came. I'd be gutted if I misrepresented the timing of this. I think that's Neil answering the question. I think the timing of that was him saying that he doesn't feel it is currently, but I think as the rest of us are optimistic for what it could do. Whereas, in contrast, Joe Smith has said, personally, yes, it's doing its job, living up to promise. However, I can see being first in the PCN that it still takes a lot of convincing for partners. We'll win them over, but it will take time. Thank you, Joe. Really appreciate that. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, especially those that have somewhat more of an optimistic analysis or positive analysis of the status quo, love to have you on the show. Really want to bring those views forward as well, because I do accept my biases on this. Vicky Johnson said massive discrepancies, can see areas where it works as should, but 2 miles down the road, really not. That is a common one, isn't it, Keith, about the inconsistency?
Yeah, it's really interesting that in Bristol, until I actually officially leave next week, every PCN in the Bristol region has a first contact physio, except for one PCN. They chose to spend their money on, I think, mental health nurse, I think. So they don't have one and didn't want one. They looked into the role, were offered, there was Sirona, had posts. They could have got independent. They chose not to have one, which is really interesting because everybody else had one. My PCN knew about the role, knew about the funding, and it was really interesting as part of the interview. They said, we're not going to use the fund. We are going to use the funding for when it comes through, but we actually don't want it because we've been offered it. We want it because we think it's a brilliant idea. We see the value. We don't have MSK interest in one of the practices at all. There's one person injecting fingers, nothing else. And in the other one, there's a couple of guys interested, but they want somebody who's an expert to come and help them learn even more. So it was like, my PCN really, really wants, and if anybody's looking for a job, they're still looking for somebody. Honestly, it was a great place to work. But the other practice, literally a mile along the road, didn't want one. And you go, well, those patients do not have access to FCP. And it's like, there were literally 2 miles difference. And that's part of the discrepancy as well, is that what the GPs perceive. And whoever said that is exactly right. There are people in the job just treating because that's what their partners want, and they're paying their wages, and that's what they want. And it's like, that's not really that's not FCP at all.
No, that variety is interesting. When it comes to inconsistency as well, we hear continual stories, especially those, and I feel for these, where they've had practices that have had legacy in situ therapists that are working in various different capacities that will see all sorts, especially when they've got this sort of
the practice physio. Go and see the practice
physio. Yeah, it's very, very complicated, especially with regards to the, again, inconsistent and variable mechanisms for funding for that, where it's often a subsidised, otherwise independent private role under a limited company or sole trader. Pretty messy and very, very vulnerable to corruption, which only speaks to the complexity of the challenge that the policymakers are facing. By the way, I look at that and don't say there's absolutely no version of an "I told you so" there, because that is an unenviable task to unpick those politics, especially when a lot of that is done behind the scenes. And I don't mean necessarily illegally, but just generally that people often underestimate that most GP practices are consortia or independent businesses as of themselves and have their own natural interests of shareholders and stakeholders within them. It's sometimes people ignore that there isn't it is a public health, but a public health system, but under different financial incentives. I want to mention here, Dom said that it does work. It's a great link between primary care and secondary care, benefits both sides. Thank you, Dom, really appreciate it. And as I've just mentioned to Joe, of course, if you want to expand on your points there, which certainly looks like a sunny analysis without a but, I would love to hear more from that. In the last few minutes, Keith, if we can, I would just want to ask, part of what you might have heard me say on this show and elsewhere is about my concern about the what I consider to be a big gap. Not just FCP, by the way. I mentioned on a show the other day a triple threat to what I consider to be the heart and soul of the NHS, without being too dramatic, but certainly of the profession, which is this, a job in rehab role within what would be classically within a mid band of a 6 and 7, right? So this who's doing the doing, who's getting people better, who's scaling people's function from where they are to where they want to get to, right? That's the heart and soul of it. It's what I'm passionate about. FCP, especially new physio schools, bringing in and wanting educators and professors, and then a third one being that private practice is proliferating off the back of the waiting lists. Right, so those three things are drawing on the same core talent that is evacuating, and they're the people that, when people talk about the workforce is coming, right, where graduates are coming through, who's supervising the graduates? Never mind the APs. I'm so worried about that implosion. Have you got anything that can reassure me in that direction?
No. Not really. Sorry to be like that. I actually, yes, there's a. I was always. I'm from the junior, senior 2, senior 1. Those are the days that I'm from. I saw nothing wrong with those, and I have a bugbear about physio, advanced extra special physio, super highly I got bugbear about all that sort of. Because I don't understand it. I have no idea. When I get a letter from somebody who's a highly advanced specialist physio, I have no idea what that means. If they said they're a senior one, I know what it means. If they said they're in a,
okay. It's like a new money. You feel like we've gone metric or something.
We've gone beyond metric.
Okay.
I actually think back in those days, you tended to do 2 years on rotations. You tend to go senior 2 for rotations, and you kind of knew what you knew what you were getting from a static senior 2 or a static senior 1, and you kind of knew what you were getting. But then everybody went into the process doing that. I think there was a spell where they increased the number of graduates. I said this to Rob online. They expanded the number of graduates massively, and for 2 years nobody could get a job. And those people often went either to other careers, went back to medicine, chiropractic, or they went on to open private practices with very little experience. And at that sort of point, it became very muddy because when I qualified, and for people who are younger, will horrify this, 2 jobs per graduate. So you literally chose where you wanted to go, sent your letter, and if it was written legibly, you were pretty much, please come work with us.
It's a bit like that at the moment, but it could go the other way. I graduated into the tail of that job crisis that you're describing. And I witnessed some of my, I know some of my close mates that I graduated with that never went into the profession. And
that happened for about 2 or 3 years, wasn't it? It was like there was just lost. There was like you were lucky, But no, I as in how you guarantee. I don't know. I like I said to you, I know of somebody with about 4 years experience who is now an FCP on a band 8A, and it's like, but that wouldn't happen in a hospital. I don't think you'd ever get a hospital trust employing somebody with 3 or 4 years experience as an 8A. They just wouldn't, because historically it would never happen. It's not. But you're now asking GPs to employ physios, and a lot of them kind of I said to you at the very beginning, there's now cherry picking going on. There are people now who, like with my level of experience, who've got all the training things you need, like being offered more than the bandings because we aren't around. Like the post I left, the PCN have openly admitted they will probably have to increase the funding significantly because they can't get anybody to apply at band 7. So they're going to have to go up to find somebody, and they're going to poach that person from another because they have to.
Well, of course, it's so competitive.
They're not poached. They're going to advertise it as a salary where somebody who's experienced band 7 or early band 8 is going to go, oh, that's an extra $5,000 a year. So there's going to be a lot of swirling around the posts as well. But how you stop it, I don't know.
But if you think about the market forces that are at play in busy private practices, and if they're struggling to recruit and they're literally watching a waiting list occur when their lack of waiting list is exactly their draw, then they are going to be willing to throw quite big money at it, especially if they're able to put the prices up and the market responds. It's going to implode. Now, I'm definitely going to wrap up because we're in overtime, and I really appreciate your time, Keith. Especially
I got Minecraft waiting for me downstairs.
You've got some annual leave to enjoy, so
smashing through some Minecraft at the minute.
It throws brilliant. It throws. I'm just throwing back to a comment earlier in the stream about what Neil made there about the fact that these arbitrary timeframes can be sometimes corrupted depending on the volume of care seen. I want to mention as well, because for those that know my story, I find it amusing that I've not brought it up when you say about I can't remember exactly how long it was, but I ended up, part of my story that I'm proud of, that I won't apologise for, but as I did go from band 5 to band 8A within probably, I think it was between 5 and 6 years, and is seen as being something that is an unusual story for various reasons, under what I would hope would be appropriate supervision, and interestingly under a hospital trust. But it's something that is part of the reason I'm proud of that story, is because I know the detail of it. And there's others. I remember, was that a record? Someone asked me, and then I met a guy called Andrew Cuff, who's just continues to go from strength to strength in the profession. Who's actually younger than me. He wears tweeds, so people think he's ancient, but he's an incredibly impressive character. We're all lucky to have in the profession. But he's someone that no one would ever. It'd be interesting for someone to try and challenge Andrew's quality and his justification under his role and job description. But it's interesting that time served doesn't necessarily always directly relate to that.
If you're good enough, and other people have judged, you and I have had an online bugbear about consultant physios just call themselves consultant because it's convenient. If somebody has judged you good enough to be that good, then kudos. It shouldn't be so set in stone that you've got to do 2 years, 3 years, 5. You shouldn't have to, and I think that's. But then by that regard, what we're saying, the FCP, there's no flexibility on that, as in the roadmap is exactly inflexible. You have to do all the competencies, whereas somebody like yourself someone like Andrew can be almost like sort of accelerated through because you have what it takes to be at that level. So I'm not saying it shouldn't happen, but I'm saying that I suspect the forces over some of the FCP posts are because the GP can't get anybody to do it. And if you can't get me to do it, you'll look down to less experience and say, well, you do it and we'll give you this. Yeah, of course I'm going to do it. And then who's supervising them? Band 8As should be what I was told, they should be supervising somebody. So if you're on your own in a GP practice or a PCN and there isn't another FCP with you and you're not supervising anybody, should you be in an 8A? And it's like, well, I know quite a lot of 8As who are on their own in practice, and maybe it's not that simple. Maybe that's my misunderstanding. But again, that's
it's for me, but it's the inconsistency again, isn't it? So I don't think it's necessarily a misunderstanding, but also even if there's many different. Imagine if I invite them to, if a fact checker combs through this and finds us our analysis wanting, it's not through lack of trying, and I think that's relevant. It doesn't mean it's a get out of jail. It's not as if we tried. Yeah. We want to hear from you, but equally, we're doing this best to understand it, and we're passionate about the conclusion being a positive one, right? In the final analysis, we want this to work. And
I might go back to it one day. I might be ready to. The airplane has been built. It knows where it's landing. It's running smoothly. It's kind of safe. I'm not currently doing another university course. I mean, I'm getting to the point where I must admit, I promised my wife I wouldn't do any more university courses. Right. But part of it was like when I saw the robot, I was like, she's gonna kill me. Especially because I was trying to sneak another one in, which didn't look like a university course. I'm like, I can't do two. She absolutely had me for you know what. But it's that kind of maybe one day, and maybe if the process changes, or I don't know, it's maybe I'll just feel fresh and ready to go back to it. Maybe, but so I wouldn't say I wouldn't go back to it. I really enjoyed it. It was a brilliant job for anybody who likes that level of complexity. And just a small disclaimer for many of the private physios who in the past have said, well, I'm an FCP. You are. It's a very, very different population of people that you're seeing. If you've never had a 20-minute conversation with somebody in Bengali via a translator, I had one just before I left. So I'll be really quick. And I said to her, can you ask where the pain is? And the translator went for 4.5 minutes. And the lady went on for 6 minutes. I'm like, can I just sit in? What's the answer question? In her neck. I was like, what?
What's happened?
What have you been talking about for 10 minutes? And it was like, it's a very different population of people. The people.
But also, you've used one example there with regards to obvious communication challenges that can occur cross-culturally. But then also you've got the polypharmacy as well as the multimorbidity stuff that then we know the social deprivation that's often coupled with, which naturally is not going to pay for ever increasing private practice rates on on contact. So it is a nonsense misnomer. And on a governance, like I use that example sometimes on a governance and legality level because it's relevant in occupational health and in FC. So when we're sometimes saying that if you want to make the case that on a legal level, new graduates shouldn't be allowed to see the public without referral or shouldn't be able to see it at first contact, you need to make that case somewhere higher than HEE with regards to roadmap. That's a different argument on the legal side. But with regards to aspiring to clinical excellence in those positions, it annoys me sometimes that people don't make that differentiation. But here we are, we're going to go into a second hour, Keith. I'm going to wrap up there. I'm really sorry to people like David Wilson, Joe Smith, who were offering brilliant comments that I want to draw on. I will read them. I will involve you guys. If you guys do fancy joining me on the show or anyone else, then please do, because this conversation rolls on.
I'm surprised so many people turned up. Thanks for coming up. Listen, everybody.
Don't be surprised, Keith. Very popular show, mate. I can't. I'm
never seen it before. Yeah, it's interesting. I might start watching. I might start watching. Great. I'm not too busy. Too busy, aren't I?
Busy in FCP doing your role. You've got time now. Yeah. Man of leisure now. Enjoy Minecraft or whatever it said you were about to do. Really appreciate your time, mate, and no doubt, as I say, the conversation goes on. All right, speak soon. Cheers, guys.
Thanks, everybody. Cheers. Bye.